Well, good morning and welcome back to Grace Bible Church, at least digitally speaking. Really hoping that all this kind of goes away before too much longer. Looks like things are starting to calm down a little bit. Some restaurants and such as that are starting to be able to reopen and do some outside stuff. So we may end up having to look at doing a little bit of that ourselves. Just so we can be with one another and see one another again, because to be frankly honest, I miss you guys. But this morning I want us to look at a particular story in Scripture that Jesus told. It's one of the parables that Jesus used, and Jesus all throughout his ministry would often teach in parables. And a parable is simply a story that teaches a lesson or that illustrates a biblical truth or the meaning behind a particular set of scriptures. And so Jesus would use these parables to try to explain things that would affect people's lives. Not just back in those days, but even today, those same parables are applicable to our own lives. They can be applied in our own lives. And so we find parables like the rich fool who gathered together all of his earthly goods, and he stored up his earthly riches and treasures, and he didn't really pay attention to heavenly treasures. And so we find that what ends up happening is he lays up and gathers up all of these things for himself, but before he can ever really even enjoy them, God tells him that your time is up and you're going to die, and somebody else is going to be the one who enjoys all of these things that you gathered and all of these things that you possess. You're not going to get to enjoy them. And so it teaches us that we should be focused more on heavenly things than earthly things. That this life is temporary. It's very, very short. It doesn't matter how long we live. It doesn't matter if we live to be in our 20s or if we live to be 120. Life is still short, and it's over before we know it. And so what Jesus is trying to teach us through this parable is that we should be focused on heavenly things rather than on earthly things, because those heavenly things are the ones that are going to last. Those heavenly things are the ones that we're going to get to take with us when this life is over. All of the things that we gather here on earth will stay here. And then we have parables like the parable of the lamp, and how when you light a lamp, you don't hide it under something. But the whole reason for lighting it is to put it up so that it shares that light and it shines that light around you. And Jesus told his disciples, go and do likewise. Go and live in such a way that the love and the mercy of God, the light that is produced from that, is shine to a dark world. Because the truth is we know that people are attracted to light. If you're lost and in the darkness, there's nothing more comforting than a little light. And so it's something that draws people and attracts people, but that can only happen when we're willing to shine our light and not hide what we've been given. Another parable that Jesus talked about was the parable of the Good Samaritan. And in this one, most of us know it. You have the Levite and the priest who walk by a guy who's been robbed and beaten and is left laying in a ditch, and they just see him and they walk on by. But a Good Samaritan, this person who to the Jews was viewed as a dog. They were a mixed breed. They were a mutt. They weren't worth anything. In fact, many Jews would even take the long way around and go around Samaria so they wouldn't have to pass through it. And yet this Samaritan is the one who stops and has compassion and helps out. And in that parable Jesus is teaching, he's teaching us that mere religion is worthless. But it's only when we live out our faith, true faith, that we can really help the world around us, that we can do good, and that we can draw people to him. And so Jesus used all of these different parables to teach all of these wonderful lessons and these wonderful truths so that we could learn them in a way that it would stick with us rather than just telling us. This morning I really want to look at a different parable. And I really want us to look at the three characters that are mentioned in this parable. And it's a parable that most of us are probably familiar with. It's the parable of the prodigal son. And so this morning I want us to really look at the story, but also to take a minute and look at each of the main characters in the story, because so often we get focused on just the prodigal son and we miss out on the other two. So Jesus begins our story in Luke chapter 15. So I'll give you a second if you got your Bible and you want to look it up. It's Luke chapter 15. We're going to start in verse 11. So Luke chapter 15, verse 11, it says, "And he said," Jesus speaking, "a man had two sons." So Jesus starts off by introducing our characters. We see that we have a father and then his two boys. And those are the three that we're going to look at this morning. So let's move on over one more verse, because right after he introduces them, Jesus gets straight into the story. He doesn't really beat around the bush. He doesn't, make anything fancy. He just gets straight to the story. So we're going to do the same. Verse 12 says, "The younger of them said to his father, 'Father, give me the share of the estate that falls to me.' So he divided his wealth between them." So this young man decides that he wants what's coming to him. He doesn't want to wait for his father to die. He wants what his father's going to give to him at his death, and he wants it now. Many teenagers today are a lot like this young man. As they begin to grow into young adults, they begin to get tired of living under mom and daddy's roof. And the reality of it is it doesn't have anything to do with the house most of the time. Instead, they get tired of living under mama and daddy's authority. They get tired of living under mom and daddy's rules. They get tired of having mom and daddy make all the decisions for them and having to abide by the decisions that mom and daddy make. That's really the problem that arises, because most teenagers begin to believe that they know what's best, that they can make better decisions, and they have a better plan for their own lives than what their parents have. And they long for the day that they get to move out. They long for the day that they no longer have to listen to the mama and daddy. They long for the day that they can be in charge of their own lives. And the truth is things haven't changed that much. Most of us who are adults probably went through a period in our lives that was pretty much the same way. We can remember what it felt like back then to have to endure those same types of struggles. I know for me as a young man, I got really tired of hearing the word no. I got tired of hearing, "No, you can't do this. No, you can't do that. No, you can't go there. No this, no that." And I really just began to hate hearing that word, because I felt and I thought that I knew what was best for me and that I could make good decisions on my own, and I didn't need somebody telling me what to do. I was a man. Truth is, it just wasn't the word I wanted to hear. It wasn't the word that gave me permission to do the things I wanted to do. But as I got older, I came to understand that no was beneficial to me. In fact, I even got to the point that I'm even thankful for all the times that my mom and dad told me no. I'm thankful for it. No kept me out of a lot of trouble. I had some friends that didn't always make the best decisions, and they weren't raised the way that I was raised, and their parents were a lot more lenient with them than mine were with me. And there's a lot of times that I probably would have gotten in a whole lot of trouble if my mom and dad hadn't have told me no. It kept me out of a lot of dangerous situations. As a young man, I thought I was 10 foot tall and bulletproof, that nothing could really hurt me. I could fall from a tall height and hit the ground and bounce back up and keep right on going, and nothing really seemed to bother me back then. No kept me from doing a lot of things that I probably shouldn't have been doing in the first place. No kept me from addictions. I have a lot of people that I grew up with that are addicted to different drugs or alcohol or pornography or so many different things. And thankfully, my mom and dad kept me from a lot of that. I was blessed that they didn't let me go a lot of the places that stuff would be available to me. And so, no kept me from addiction. Truthfully, no kept me from doing a lot of things. A lot of things that could have been hurtful to me, both physically, emotionally, and even financially. And I came to realize that no that I was getting, that no, that word that I hated so much as a young man, really was protecting me from my own ignorance and poor judgment. And that it was one of the ways that my mom and dad were protecting me. Not because they didn't want me to have fun, not because they didn't want me to have great experiences, not because they didn't want me to live life, but because they loved me and wanted what was best for me. And so because of that, I've come to really respect the word that I hated so much as a young man. And I'm so thankful for the times I got told no. But this young man in our story didn't see things that way. He wasn't interested in being told no anymore. Instead, he wanted his portion of his father's inheritance so that he could strike out on his own and do his own thing. So this father divides up his possessions between his two sons. And then we pick up in verse 13. It says, "And not many days later, the younger son gathered everything together and went on a journey to a distant country, and there squandered his estate with loose living." So this young man gets as far away from his father as he can. He gets far away so that there's no one to tell him no. There's no one to tell him he's making a big mistake. There's no one to tell him that what he's doing isn't right. There's no one there to tell him no. Only problem with that is not only is there no one there to tell him no, there's no safety net either. There's nothing there to help protect him or catch him if he falls. And so he does exactly what so many young people do when they get out on their own. He makes a whole lot of mistakes. He begins to waste all of his money on loose living. He surrounds himself with people who he thinks are his friends and even calls his friends, but they're really just there to use him for his money. And we find that that's the case because as soon as the money runs dry, the friends are nowhere to be found. Verse 14. "Now when he had spent everything, there was a severe famine that occurred in that country, and he began to be impoverished." So our young man who thought he knew better, he thought that he would be able to make better decisions about what he should do with his life than that of his father. He thought he knew what was best, and he was going to do what he wanted to do. This young man now finds himself in a bit of a bind. He's out of money. All his friends are gone. He has no food, he has no shelter, and there's no one there to help him. You know, most of us fall into the same category as this young man. Most of us can really relate with him, not just in our youth, but even into our adulthood. Some probably even today. Because you see, most of the time we look at God and we say, I want to do things my way. I want to do what I want to do. I know what's best for me. I don't want to listen to your advice, God. I don't want to do what you've told me to do. I want to do things my own way. And because of that, most of us have, or even are, finding ourselves back in the same shoes as this prodigal son. We're in a bind because we've done things that we shouldn't have done. We've not listened to the fatherly advice that God gave us in his word. And so because of that, we can really relate to what this young man's going through. He's fallen without a safety net. And because of that, he finds himself in a position that most Jews wouldn't even really dream of finding themselves. Verses 15 and 16. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country. And he sent him into his fields to feed swine. And he would have gladly filled his stomach with the pods that the swine were eating. And no one was giving him anything. So anyone that has ever owned pigs knows how nasty of a job this young man had to take. I remember growing up, we had several times that we had pigs, and I always hated having to go and clean out that stinking pig pen. It was always nasty and dirty and smelly, and it just wasn't a whole lot of fun to have to clean up after pigs. But for this young man, things are worse than even that. It's not even that it's just a nasty job to have, but for Jews consider pigs to be unclean animals. And they don't really like to have anything to do with things that are unclean. And so for him to accept a job taking care of pigs shows you just how far he's fallen. He's willing to do things that most of the people that he grew up with, most of the people that he knew wouldn't stoop to doing. And then to think that he's so hungry he even considers eating from the pig trough. He's definitely reached an all-time low. And worst of all, much like when we hit those low points in our lives, it's all his fault. It's all his fault because his choices and his decisions have brought him to this place. Much like with us, our choices and our decisions have brought us to where we are as well. You know, we can often act a lot like the prodigal son. We start flirting with the idea of sin, and then once we do that long enough, we begin to act on our sinful thoughts. And then one sin leads to another, and then another, and then another. And when we finally realize what's happened, we barely even recognize the person that we see in the mirror. We barely even recognize who we are because of how far we've gone from God. And it's hard to understand how in the world we got ourselves there. But the truth is it's all our fault. One step at a time, one sin at a time, we've chosen to go after the things of the world rather than the things of God. And because of it, many of us often find ourselves in the pig pen. You know, the old saying is true. Sin will take you further than you wanted to go. It'll keep you longer than you wanted to stay. And it'll cost you far more than you ever dreamed you would have to pay. That's the way it works. Verse 17 says, "But when he came to his senses," date myself a little bit, back in my day we called that a duh moment. When he came to his senses, he was, duh. How many of my father's hired men have more than enough bread? But here I am dying with hunger. In other words, he finally comes to his senses. He realizes, he's like, what in the world am I thinking? What am I doing? If I was back home right now, my belly would be full. If I was back home right now, everything would be okay. If I was back home right now, I wouldn't smell of pig. I wouldn't be filthy and disgusting. If I was back home. He finally realizes things weren't so bad living under Daddy's roof. Wasn't so bad living under Daddy's authority and under Daddy's rules. Many young people eventually come to the same conclusion. But usually by the time they do, they're already carrying around the scars of their bad choices. They're already carrying these physical, emotional, and mental scars that'll follow them for the rest of their lives. By the time they realize things weren't so bad at home. So the prodigal son realizes that he has made a big mistake. And at this point he decides it's time to go home. And so we pick up in verses 18 and 19, and he comes up with a plan. He says, I will get up and go to my father. And I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me as one of your hired men. And now we know the rest of the story. We know how the father accepts him back with open arms. And you know, most of us can really relate to the prodigal son, because most of us have walked away from God. Most of us have wandered away at one time or another and wandered aimlessly into sin until we find ourselves in a place where we don't even recognize ourselves because of how far we've gotten from God. And you know, some of you may even be in that position right now. Right now, you may be in a position to where you're dealing with and fighting with and battling with depression because of the choices that you've made and the decisions that you've taken. And of all the times that you've neglected God and His things and chased after the things of the world and exactly where that's gotten you. Some of you may be in that position right now. And if that's where you find yourself, I want to tell you there's good news. There's good news for you. God wants you to come back home. He doesn't want you to stay in the pig pen. He doesn't want you to stay in the waller and the filth of sin in this world. He wants you to come home. And you have the choice to do that. He offers that to you. You know, this is the only time where we see God run. All through Scripture, we don't find God running. God doesn't run from a fight. What's the point? He's all powerful. He is sovereign. There's nothing in this world that can take him. There's nothing that can whip him. There's nothing that can even stand against him. He's God. God doesn't run from a fight. There's nothing in this world that scares him because he created it in the first place. But this is one time where we actually see God run. Verse 20 through 24 says, "So he got up and came to his father. But when he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion on him and ran and embraced him and kissed him. And the son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his slaves, 'Quickly, bring out the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet. And bring the fatted calf, kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and has come to life again. He was lost and has been found.' And they began to celebrate." Did you see it? Look back at verse 20 again. It says, "So he got up and came to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion for him and ran and embraced him and kissed him." This is the only time that we see God run. And he's not running away from anything. He's running to something. He's running to one of his children that has decided to come back home. What a beautiful picture. What a beautiful analogy as the father runs to his son. And if you've walked away from God, you don't have to go back to where you once were with him for him to want you back. You don't have to get all the way back to where you were when you turned and walked away. All God wants you to do is to turn around and take that first step back towards him, and he will come running back to you. He will meet you where you are. And just like the father in this story did for his son, he will clean you up. And he will be the one who puts his robe of righteousness, wraps it all around you, and puts a ring on your finger to say, "This is mine. This is my child." You see, ultimately, whenever we walk away from God, what happens is we break the fellowship that we have together. We break that closeness that we have with one another. But we never stop being his child. He's still always daddy. You know, some of you may know my dad. My dad is Hardy Estes. He's a pastor over in Mitty, Louisiana. And he's my daddy. And there's nothing that I can do to not be his boy. He's told me in the past that there's things I could do to make him want to take me out. But I'd never stop being his boy. In the same way with us, we'll never stop being God's child, his son or his daughter. He still loves us. And even in the middle of our sin, covered in the stink and the filth of our bad choices and decisions, God will run to us and wrap his loving arms around us. You see, the father didn't wait for his son to get cleaned up. The father didn't wait for his son to take off those nasty, stinking, pig poop covered clothes before he embraced him. He ran straight to him just as he was, wrapped his arms around him and said, "I love you. Now let me clean you up. Let me help you to restore the fellowship that we had with one another." Let me bring you back in and show you, you still my boy. You still my girl. You don't have to clean up before coming to God. He'll take care of that part for you. Which brings us to our last character, the oldest son. He's been quietly watching all of this take place. Other than the very first verse, this is the very next time we see him even mentioned. He hasn't been a major player in our story so far. Because you see, he's just been kind of watching all that's been going on. But now that his screw-up brother is welcomed back into the family with open arms, after all the damage he's done, the older brother can't really take it anymore. And so we pick up in verse 25 through 30. It says, "Now his older son was in the field, and when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. And he summoned one of the servants and began inquiring what these things could be. And he said to him, 'Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf, because he has received him back safe and sound.' But he became angry and was not willing to go in. And his father came out and began pleading with him. But he answered and said to his father, 'Look, for so many years I have been serving you. I've never neglected a command of yours. And yet you've never given me a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came, who has devoured your wealth with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him.' So the oldest son is angry. He's angry that it looks like his brother is being celebrated even after all that he has done. After the fact that he has literally wasted a large portion of the family's money and estate. He's thrown it all away. And yet he's the one that's being celebrated. Not the brother who's been there, not the brother who's been faithful, not the one who stayed, not the one who kept working. He's not being celebrated, but this one who went out and was a total screw up, he's being celebrated. And that just makes the brother angry. He didn't understand why the father was so happy to see his child come back home. You know, it's strange to think, but sometimes believers can be jealous of the return of a prodigal son or a daughter. They can be jealous even of somebody who just got saved. And rather than joining in and celebrating with the father and with the rest of the family, they'd rather find reasons to get or stay upset at him. They would rather be jealous and angry than to celebrate. What a strange way to think, especially for a believer. I encourage you, if you find yourself in the same shoes as this older brother, let go. Let go of that anger and that resentment and that jealousy. Let it go. Because you see, God doesn't only just want to repair the fellowship with the prodigal and himself, but he also wants to repair the relationship with the prodigal and the rest of the family as well. It's not just about the two of them, but it's about the whole family. So this morning, most of us can probably find ourselves relating to one of the two boys. And so if you find yourself this morning relating to the prodigal son, remember you can always come home. There's no distance that you can go that the Father won't come running to you. There's nothing that you can do to make him love you any less. You can always come home. Your Father is waiting. He's patiently waiting for you to make the first steps so that he can come running and embrace you and clean you up and welcome you back. Won't you come home today? Will today be the day that you let go of the sin in your life and say, God, I'm all yours. I just want to come home. To be under your rules, your authorities, even all the times that you say no, because I know it's all in love. I know it's all because you want what's best for me. So Daddy, I just want to come home. God's waiting for that. Or if you relate more to the older brother who stayed home and continued to work and serve and remained faithful, I encourage you to remember that you too were once separated from the Father. And if it weren't for his love and his mercy and his grace, you'd have never found your place home, found your way home in the first place. So be patient with those who are still searching. Be patient with those who are still wandering. And even those who may have wandered away from home. Be patient. Be loving. And be like the Father. Ready to welcome them back with open arms when they repent and turn back to him. Maybe today you don't really relate a whole lot with either one of the boys because you've never been a part of the family to begin with. Well, this morning I offer you that invitation. And the wonderful thing is you don't have to be sitting in this church to accept the invitation that's offered. It doesn't matter where you are. You can be at home. You can be at work. You can be sitting in your car. You can be outside. You can be inside. It doesn't matter. God will meet you right where you are. Because you see, there's a penalty to pay for your sin. There's a penalty to pay. And it's a penalty that you can't pay on your own. But God saw to it that the debt was paid. All you have to do is accept it. When Jesus came and died on the cross for you, he took upon himself the punishment that you deserved for your choices and your sin. And he said, I'll take the beating. I'll take the punishment so that you don't have to. All you have to do is accept the gift that he offers. Put your faith and your trust in his death, burial, and resurrection as the payment for the penalty of your sin. And he'll welcome you into the family with open arms. I encourage you, if that's you today, please accept his invitation. I can promise you, from experience, it'll be one that you'll never regret. Will things be easy? No. Not always. And anybody that tries to tell you they will be is lying to you. But one thing I can promise you is the reward at the end is well worth it. So this morning, whichever decision that you need to make, whichever decision it is that God is laying on your heart, I pray that you make it. Don't put it off. Don't wait. Don't try to clean yourself up first. Just come to God. Because you can try to clean yourself up for a lifetime and you'll never succeed on your own. Let God do it for you. So until we meet again, may God bless you and your families and keep you safe. Love you guys. Can't wait to see you soon.